Ah, my friends, let me take you on a journey today where we open the dusty pages of the past and discover the dawn of a new era. Today, we'll explore the time when the world as we knew it came to an end, and the doors to an unknown world were opened. Imagine, if you will, the wind from Europe's narrow villages carrying itself across oceans, reaching distant lands. People eager to explore what lay beyond were following stars they had never seen before, risking their lives to uncover what was hidden behind the waves. This is the story of those brave souls, but oh, this story is not just about the discovery of new lands, it is also a tale of power, ambition, and the struggle for survival. As time moved from the dark Middle Ages into the Age of Enlightenment, paths began to change, trade was reshaped, and worlds were connected. Today, I will tell you how this transformation began, who carved their names into this saga, and how humanity found itself facing an unknown future. Now, close your eyes and imagine the salty scent of the distant seas filling your nostrils, the hum of the wind through the ship's masts in your ears. We are about to step into this captivating adventure that marks the end of one era and the beginning of another. For this is the story of exploration and change. Ah, my dear friends, come a little closer to the fire, because I'm about to tell you about one of the most turbulent periods in Europe's ancient lands. This is the story of an era where shadows stretched, old systems began to crack, but a new world was about to sprout. The last century of the Middle Ages. Ah, what strange times they were. Imagine the crumbling stones of the feudal system that had been in place for centuries. Imagine a world once surrounded by castle walls, now spreading like a massive river, flowing in all different directions. Once, peasants lived under the rule of lords and kings, bound to the land, but they were starting to realize they could no longer survive just by working the fields. The feudal system had been the backbone of Europe's economy, but that backbone was now exhausted. Political power was slipping from the hands of small feudal lords into the hands of bigger players, kings and city-states. Ah, city-states, bustling marketplaces promising freedom, the clanging of metals in workshops, merchants whispering hopeful promises. These were the first signs of Europe's future. During this time, people were leaving behind their old safety nets and venturing into great adventures. Cities were no longer just fortified safe havens. They were becoming centers of opportunity, innovation, and hope. Florence, Venice, Genoa. These names probably ring a bell, right? These city-states were not just the heart of trade, but also the birthplace of ideas, art, and scientific revolutions. For the first time, people were stepping into a world where they could take control of their own destinies. But, of course, it wasn't all that simple. The collapse of the feudal structure brought along great conflicts. Peasants rose up against their lords for freedom. Landowners and kings fought battles to control this new world. Think about it. After the peasant revolts in the countryside, the dust and smoke from the 100 Years' War between kingdoms like England and France were still rising. People were being crushed under the weight of the old order while trying to navigate the uncertainty brought by the new world. At the same time, Europe's economy was undergoing a huge transformation. Trade was no longer limited to local markets. Ships full of goods were being carried across the Mediterranean, and merchants were searching for new routes. As the Silk Road slowly lost its appeal, the West's eyes were turning farther, to more uncharted lands. People weren't just dreaming of this world, they were starting to imagine what lay beyond it. So, have you ever witnessed a moment of transformation like this? Have you ever seen the old world collapse with no clear idea of what would come next? That's exactly what the last century of the Middle Ages was like. People found themselves at the crossroads of great uncertainty and massive potential. And it was at this moment that brave souls began to step forward, ready to chart Europe's new course. But wait, let me ask you a question. How did the crumbling structure of the old world turn into a quest to discover new horizons? Ah, my friends, we'll find the answer in the next chapter. Ah, my dear friends, come gather around the fire again. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a monumental event that changed the course of history. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself in the middle of the 15th century at the crossroads of East and West. It was a time when the Eastern Roman Empire was nearing its end, but the Ottoman Empire was beginning to shine like a rising star. This is the story of the conquest of Constantinople, or what we now call Istanbul. Back then, Constantinople, despite its centuries-old glory, felt like a tired city. The city's walls symbolized the power of ancient times, but the empire inside had long lost its strength. The Eastern Roman Empire, once the ruler of the Mediterranean world, was now reduced to Constantinople and a few small surrounding territories. Its collapse had been slow and drawn out over many years. Barbarian invasions, internal strife, and economic troubles had brought the mighty empire to its knees. The city had witnessed the looting of the Crusaders from the west and had long lost all hope. But beyond those ancient walls, the Ottoman Empire was rising, young, strong, and hungry like a lion. The Ottomans had grown into a power stretching from Anatolia to the Balkans. Sultan Mehmed II, or as his people called him, Fatih, the Conqueror, was only 21 years old, but he had a grand vision. For him, Constantinople was not just a city, it was the key to both East and West. Conquering it would mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. But, my friends, this would not be an easy task. Sultan Mehmed knew that the city's walls had never been breached by any army. Constantinople was surrounded by the Theodosian walls. These were not only a defense line, but also a symbol of the city's pride. However, Sultan Mehmed wasn't afraid of the height of the walls or the support Byzantium received from the west. With him, he had the strength of the Ottoman army and the latest marvel of technology, the Shahi cannons. These massive cannons, built with the help of a Venetian cannon maker, could hurl stone projectiles miles away. Mehmed relied not only on his military power, but also on his intelligence and patience. In the spring of 1453, the Ottoman army laid siege to Constantinople. The city's walls were bombarded with siege machines and cannons. During the days of fierce battle, the Byzantines continued to defend without giving up. Ah, my dear friends, can you imagine that noise? The deafening explosions of the cannons, the clashing of swords, the terrifying hiss of boiling oil pouring down from the walls. How small one must have felt in the middle of such a scene, right? Finally, the morning of May 29th arrived. The Ottoman soldiers launched one final attack at dawn. The gaps in the walls created by the cannons opened a path for the soldiers. Sultan Mehmed, at the very front of his army, watched the battle unfold as if history itself were watching him. And in that moment, the Turkish flag was planted on the city's walls. Constantinople had fallen. The city had surrendered to the Ottomans, opening the doors to a new era. The conquest was not just a victory, It was a turning point that would shape the future of the world. The Ottomans had become the rulers of the eastern Mediterranean and controlled the trade routes. The gateway to the Silk Road that connected to the west was now in their hands. This situation was like a wake-up call for the Western world. Eager to regain the trade routes, the West began searching for new paths. Who knows? Maybe this quest would be the first step towards Christopher Columbus discovering America. Ah, my dear friends, that's how it was. The conquest of Constantinople and the great change it brought. But let me leave you with a question. Was the Ottoman victory limited to just a city, or did it completely change the flow of world history? We'll discuss that in the next chapter. Ah, my dear friends, today I'm going to take you to the beginning of an era that set sail towards endless horizons. Imagine this, the endless blue of the sea blending into the horizon and a ship bravely sailing into the unknown. This story is not just about the seas, but about an age that conquered the dreams of humanity. The invention of the caravel and the great breakthroughs in maritime technology laid the foundation for the revolutionary changes that sparked the age of exploration. Now for a moment, let yourself be transported to the late 15th century, when the ports were filled with the salty winds of the morning and sailors burned with the desire for adventure. A wave of curiosity swept through the cities of Europe. With the trade routes now under the control of the Ottomans, people were looking for other ways to reach the riches of Asia. But these routes were no longer simple to navigate by the old methods. Longer, more dangerous, and uncertain sea voyages were needed. And here, a ship of unmatched elegance and durability entered the scene, the caravel. Ah, my dear friends, the caravel was not just a ship, it was a revolution. First developed by Portuguese sailors, this ship was lightweight and fast, yet strong enough to withstand the harsh conditions of the open seas. Its triangular sails gave it maneuverability against strong winds, while its square sails provided speed. These features allowed sailors to boldly venture into unknown waters. The caravel was as suitable for passing through narrow river channels as it was for withstanding the vast waves of the ocean. It was truly a marvel of technology that captured the spirit of the times. But, my friends, no matter how perfect a ship is, if the captain lacks the right tools, it would be impossible to venture beyond the seas. And this is where one of humanity's greatest gifts in navigation came into play, the compass. Ah, imagine that once upon a time, sailors could only find their way by looking at the stars. But when clouds hid the stars or storms arose, losing their way was inevitable. The compass, however, shone like a light in the dark. This simple yet effective device, which came from China and reached Europe, enabled sailors to always find north. The power of the compass was hidden in its needle, but that needle could guide dreams brave enough to conquer the world. Along with the compass, another great development was the refinement of sea maps, or portolans. Ah, my dear friends, there was a time when maps were mere rough sketches, with only the coastlines and a few simple markings. But during the 15th century, sailors and cartographers worked together to depict the world on paper. Each new journey meant new details added to the maps. Sailors, listening to the sounds of the waves, carefully recorded the shapes of distant lands and coastlines, while cartographers transcribed this information onto paper, laying the groundwork for future voyages. These maps were not just tools for sailors, they were guides to dreams as well. The caravel, the compass, and the detailed maps took sailors to places they had never reached before. With these technologies, Portuguese and Spanish sailors began to sail along the coasts of Africa, reach India by sea, and even discover new continents across the Atlantic. Each of these steps was not just a victory for their nations, but a change in the fate of all humanity. And my friends, without these innovations, could Christopher Columbus have discovered America, or Vasco da Gama reached India? But let me leave you with a question. Were all these advancements merely technological progress, or were they a reflection of humanity's endless curiosity for the unknown? We will discuss that in the next chapter. My dear friends, let me now take you to one of those pivotal moments in history. As humanity turned toward new ages, sometimes paths closed, and other times circumstances forced people to seek new horizons. The merging of the Eastern Mediterranean trade routes under the powerful hands of the Ottoman Empire marked the beginning of such an era. This was a story where not only maps but also minds and economic balances were reshaped. The spice routes, what a grand concept. But the disruption of these routes sparked a chain of events that would change Europe's destiny. Imagine, once upon a time, caravans from the exotic lands of the East crossing the Silk Road and reaching the ports of Venice. Spices from India, silks from China, perfumes and precious stones carried by Arab traders. These were the riches that adorned the tables and palaces of Europe's nobility. Yet, by the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire had solidified its control over the eastern Mediterranean. Sultan Mehmed II's conquest of Constantinople, seizing the very crossroads of trade, was like a warning bell to Europe. When the Ottomans took control of the heart of the eastern Mediterranean, they began to tightly oversee the trade routes. Such power! Spices from India and other eastern riches now had to pass through Ottoman lands. Every caravan that passed was taxed under the Ottomans' firm rule, nearly doubling the price of goods reaching Europe. Spices were no longer just kitchen ingredients. They were symbols of wealth and status. Imagine black pepper, cinnamon, ginger, seemingly simple goods, were stored like jewels in the treasuries of kingdoms. But now, access to these treasures was growing increasingly difficult, and the murmurs of discontent began to be heard. My dear friends, the Ottomans did not only control trade, they also began to squeeze Europe's maritime republics, such as Venice and Genoa. The free flow of trade ships in the eastern Mediterranean was no longer possible. As spice prices soared in European cities, it was not just flavor that was missing from kitchens. This situation caused the economies dependent on trade routes to experience a deep crisis. Especially the Italian city-states found themselves in a tough spot. People realized that unless new solutions were found, this economic stranglehold would threaten the future of Europe. This situation sparked new questions and dreams in the minds of European leaders. Could there be another way to reach the riches of the East without passing through Ottoman control? This question was powerful enough to set an entire continent in motion. Now, all eyes were on the seas. Portugal and Spain became the two nations leading this new pursuit. Famous explorers prepared to set sail in search of new sea routes. Reaching the riches of Asia was no longer just an economic necessity, but also a matter of national prestige. But my friends, this story does not end here. The explorers seeking new routes were not just after spices. This pursuit unlocked humanity's passion for discovering the unknown and opened the door to great discoveries that would forever change the world map. So, I ask you, did this quest lead them only to the east, or did it take them to lands they never knew existed? The answer to this question is hidden in one of history's greatest adventures. My dear friends, behind every story that we turn the pages of in history, there lies a passion, a determination, and a dream. And this time, we are faced with the epic of those who made that dream come true, the beginning of the age of exploration. And igniting this grand adventure was Portugal. Yes, a tiny kingdom. When it decided to challenge the vast oceans, the world began to reshape itself once again. One of the heroes of this tale was none other than Prince Henry, the Navigator, a name bestowed upon him by history. Now close your eyes and let us travel back to the early 15th century. We find ourselves in Portugal, a country nestled on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, where the air is thick with the scent of salt. This land burned with the desire to venture out to sea. It was during this time that Prince Henry, from a courageous and forward-thinking family, sat on the throne. But, my friends, what set him apart from the others was his unwavering passion for knowledge, discovery, and the sea. Henry was not just a prince, he was a visionary. He wanted to illuminate the secrets of the oceans that had remained in the dark and to expand the boundaries of the world. This is why, after conquering Ceuta in 1415, he turned Portugal's attention to the western coast of Africa. Henry had a grand plan to break the Islamic world's dominance in the spice and gold trade and to find new trade routes along Africa's west coast. To achieve this, he gathered skilled sailors, cartographers, and shipbuilders and established a nautical school in Sagres. This place became the heart of exploration. Maps were updated, compasses were refined, and ships were made more durable. A new era's doors were opening. Ah, my friends, just imagine. What must those first sailors have felt to set out into the unknown, to sail into an endless ocean where maps ended, required immense courage. And it was with hearts full of courage that under Henry's patronage, sailors began exploring the western coast of Africa. The first expeditions began with small explorations along the coast. Slowly, with each port, new lands were discovered, and with each bay, new information was gathered. Portuguese ships, capturing strategic points like the Canary Islands and Azores, began to establish bases for trade and started filling in the blank spaces on the maps. As these brave sailors advanced along the African coasts, they didn't just discover lands, they also opened new doors for the gold trade. The gold fields of West Africa became a new source of wealth for Europe. Gold was not just a metal, it was an economic tool that could shift the power balances in Europe. But in Africa's hot lands, not only was gold discovered, rich cultures, intricate trade networks, and grand stories of human history were found. During these pursuits, the Portuguese did not merely chase economic gain. They also introduced a new maritime understanding to the world. Under Prince Henry's leadership, the caravels were developed, ships sturdy enough to cross vast oceans, yet agile enough to follow the coastline. These ships became the key instruments of the age of exploration. With every sail set, new information about lands was collected, and these details would become the roadmaps for future expeditions. So, my dear friends, what do you think happened as a result of these explorations? Portugal didn't just spark a change along the African coasts. It initiated a major shift in the course of world history. But this great maritime adventure was not limited to the quest for gold and spices. These brave sailors stood on the brink of a discovery far greater than they could have ever imagined. Would this journey introduce them to new continents? In the next chapter, we shall find the answer to this question. Ah, I can hardly wait, my dear friends. Ah, my dear friends, allow me to take you to those thrilling days when the wind howled and the waves danced. Our story takes place in a time when a dream forged by determination became a reality, and the boundless nature of the seas was tamed by human will. Yes, I speak of Bartolomeo Diaz and his unparalleled discovery, the unforgettable moment when he reached the Cape of Good Hope. This tale is not only the victory of one sailor, but also one of the epic sagas that changed the course of an entire era. In the late 1480s, Portugal was pushing the boundaries of maritime exploration. Previous discoveries had opened new routes along the African coast for the gold and spice trade, enriching Portugal. But the true dream was to sail around the southern tip of Africa and reach the Indian Ocean. Imagine, my friends, when this was achieved, Europe would have direct access to the source of spices and luxury goods, and the Ottoman dominance in the Mediterranean would be thwarted. It was Bartolomeo Diaz who chased this grand dream. His name is remembered for courage and determination because he was someone who dared to break through the unknown darkness of the seas. In 1487, when Diaz set sail on the orders of King João II of Portugal, no one knew how the journey would unfold. With 3 small ships, he ventured into the unknown. Alongside sailors, he had cartographers and astronomers who would unravel the secrets of the winds, waves, and stars. The caravels, developed for long voyages, were sturdy and fit for the challenge. But my friends, no matter how well prepared they were, they faced the wrath of the vast ocean. During their journey, they left behind one known point after another along the African coast. The wind was sometimes their ally, sometimes their foe. For months, they advanced, establishing ports in unknown territories and trading with the locals. But the most difficult part of the adventure began when the famous storm hit, testing Diaz and his crew's resolve. During these moments, as the dream of reaching the Indian Ocean was tested, the sailors prayed in fear while Diaz, relying on his compass and the stars, tried to navigate. The storm lasted for days, dragging them far from the coast, deep into the ocean. Yet, my friends, it was precisely at this point that the power of courage emerged. Diaz did not give up. When the storm finally passed, he had crossed the southern tip of Africa. He had reached the Cape of Good Hope. Imagine, my dear friends, the scene they must have witnessed. Before them stretched the endless expanse of the Indian Ocean. Diaz and his crew were almost spellbound by this monumental discovery. Diaz named it Cape of Storms, due to the battle they fought to reach it. However, King João II would later rename it the Cape of Good Hope, for this discovery had turned the hope of reaching the East into a tangible reality. This discovery was not just about finding a new route. Diaz's courage and success made Portugal the leader in the age of exploration. He proved that it was possible to reach the Indian Ocean by sailing around the southern tip of Africa, paving the way for Vasco da Gama's later journey to India. The Cape of Good Hope would become not only a hub for trade, but also a meeting point for cultures. This discovery would fundamentally alter the Europeans' perception of the world. But my friends, now I must ask you, after Diaz opened this route, what happened to Portugal's subsequent discoveries? Could the next great exploration have changed the course of world history? The answers to these questions, my dear friends, await you in the next chapter. Until then, keep your dreams alive and don't forget to keep your eyes on the horizon. My dear friends, let me now recount to you that grand adventure as though you were there, witnessing one of the greatest turning points in history. The days when Christopher Columbus set sail into the vast seas. In an age when human imagination pushed the limits and every risk was taken to uncover the unknown. Columbus's story is nothing short of a saga of courage and determination. Let me take you to that warm summer morning in 1492. Columbus, born in Genoa, was a man who felt the call of the seas from a young age. He learned to navigate by the stars and deciphered the language of winds and waves. But what set him apart from others was the extraordinary idea that constantly spun in his mind. The world was round, wasn't it? If that was true, it should be possible to reach India not by heading east, but by sailing west, thus achieving the same result. This simple yet radical thought formed the foundation of Columbus's dreams. For years, he sought support to make this idea a reality. He knocked on the doors of Europe's kingdoms, but no one paid heed to the dreams of this mad navigator. Some laughed at him, while others found his calculations unreasonable. But Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain finally accepted Columbus's plan. Perhaps they believed that a new route to India would increase Spain's trade and wealth. They provided Columbus with 3 ships, Santa Maria, Pinta, and Nina. These modest ships would bear witness to one of the greatest discoveries in human history. On the morning of August 3, 1492, Columbus and his crew set sail from Spain's Palos harbor. They embarked on their journey, unaware of what lay beyond the sea, uncertain of where the winds would carry them. For weeks, they were surrounded by the vast, endless blue of the ocean. Tensions arose among the crew. Some wanted to turn back, while others feared they would disappear forever. But Columbus's eyes were always on the horizon. His faith kept the crew's spirits high. Every day he encouraged them, saying, "Tomorrow we will see land." And finally, on the morning of October 12, 1492, a crew member shouted that he had seen land on the horizon. In that moment, waves of joy swept through the ship. When Columbus and his men set foot on the island of Guanahani in the Caribbean, they believed they had reached India. However, Columbus's discovery was actually opening the door to a completely new world. As soon as they arrived, Columbus encountered the natives. Their peaceful demeanor and exotic way of life represented an entirely new world to the Europeans. My dear friends, imagine for a moment. This discovery of Columbus did not just introduce a new continent to Europe, but it also changed the course of world history irreversibly. The exotic goods brought from the Caribbean islands caused great excitement among the Europeans. These new lands promised wealth and opportunities beyond dreams. But this discovery also caused the old world to set its eyes on the riches of the new world. Columbus's dream would herald the era of colonization and the destruction of many indigenous cultures. But wait, my friends, Columbus's journey was just the beginning. What did the Europeans find in the depths of this new world? How did these discoveries lead to a transformation of the world? The answers to these questions will unfold in the next chapter. Keep your eyes on the horizon and your heart beating with curiosity. Ah, my dear friends, let me now transport you to one of the most intriguing moments in history, a time when the world was literally divided and mapped with rulers. The year is 1494. With the discoveries unfolding, the great powers of Europe had begun a fierce competition, and now these efforts had turned into strategic moves to dominate the seas. Here comes the tale of the Treaty of Tordesillas, where Spain and Portugal literally sat down and decided the fate of the world. It had only been 2 years since Columbus's discovery of the New World, and the impact of these explorations was already causing storms in Europe. Spain, claiming the Caribbean and surrounding territories as its own, was on the rise. Meanwhile, Portugal, through its explorations along the west coast of Africa and the trade routes leading to the Cape of Good Hope, was striving for its share of wealth. The tension between these two countries was escalating into not just a commercial rivalry, but a political and religious conflict. The two maritime powers could not agree on who should control these newly discovered lands. And then a powerful figure stepped onto the stage, Pope Alexander VI. At this time, the influence of the Catholic Church was unquestionable in Europe. Both Spain and Portugal maintained their loyalty to the Church, and the word of the Pope could shape even the borders of nations. Pope Alexander VI intervened in the dispute and proposed a plan to divide the world with an imaginary line. In 1493, the papal bull was issued, stating that a meridian line would be drawn in the Atlantic Ocean, passing through the western coast of Africa. Lands to the west of this line would belong to Spain, while those to the east would be under Portugal's control. However, this line left Portugal with a very narrow area, and the Portuguese kingdom insisted on a larger share. Finally, in 1494, representatives from Spain and Portugal gathered in the town of Tordesillas. The negotiations were long and arduous. Both sides were determined to control lucrative trade routes and strategic territories. As a result, the line proposed by the Pope was shifted a bit further east, and this new boundary gave Portugal the rights to present-day Brazil. And so, this is why, today, Portuguese is spoken in Brazil, while the rest of South America predominantly speaks Spanish. The treaty was not just a geographical division, but a turning point that fundamentally altered Europe's view of the world. But my dear friends, the effects of the Treaty of Tordesillas were not only political or commercial. This division also laid the groundwork for a religious mission. Both nations promised to spread Christianity in the lands they discovered, along with colonizing them. In their pursuit of this religious goal, Spain and Portugal took actions that would irreversibly change the lifestyles, beliefs, and cultures of the indigenous people of these new lands. In this process, the native populations not only faced diseases brought by Europeans, but also had to confront the imposition of foreign religious and cultural norms. Now, think for a moment, my dear friends. The world was divided by a few leaders sitting at a table. But did this truly bring peace? Or did this division sow the seeds for future conflicts? The effects of the Treaty of Tordesillas would not just shake Europe, but the entire world. But this is not the end of the story. Far from it. What will happen as the explorations continue and other European nations are left out of this grand division? Let us seek the answers to these questions together. Ah, my dear friends, are you ready to embark on a journey that would change the course of history? Once, the vast oceans of the world were uncharted, filled with unknown terrors. Sailors believed that massive sea monsters would swallow their ships, and they would look nervously at the dark waters beyond the horizon. But in the late 15th century, there was a man who dared to go beyond the horizon, Vasco da Gama. With his courageous spirit, he set sail not only to change the fate of Portugal, but to alter the entire course of human history. This is the story of his remarkable journey and the discovery of the first sea route to India. In July 1497, Vasco da Gama departed from the port of Lisbon with 4 ships and a crew of 170 men. Under the command of King Manuel I, this fleet was not merely aiming to reach the heart of the spice trade, but to establish Portugal as a global power. However, this voyage was more than just a commercial expedition. What was at stake was not only the spice trade, but the future of Portugal's maritime empire. As the crew came face to face with death amid the vast waves of the ocean, Vasco da Gama's leadership became their greatest compass. The journey turned out to be much more difficult than imagined. As they traveled south along the west coast of Africa, fierce winds and towering waves threatened to tear the ships apart with every passing moment. Yet Vasco da Gama had faith in the centuries-old maritime wisdom and Portugal's superior shipbuilding technology. Finally, they succeeded in passing the dangerous waters of the Cape of Good Hope, a region that had been impassable for sailors up until that point. Their success in overcoming this barrier was a testament to the determination of Portugal's brave sailors to expand the boundaries of the known world. When they finally reached the Indian Ocean, new challenges emerged. They faced fierce competition from Arab merchants who controlled these waters. Vasco da Gama and his crew used diplomacy and determination to find friendly harbors, forging connections with local leaders in Mozambique and Malindi, which allowed their journey to continue. In May 1498, they finally arrived at the port of Calicut on the west coast of India. This moment was not just the opening of a trade route, it marked the meeting of two worlds. In Calicut, Vasco da Gama negotiated with local leaders to solidify Portugal's role in the spice trade. However, the local population's suspicions, coupled with Portugal's diplomatic shortcomings, made the first encounter tense. Nonetheless, Vasco da Gama's success fundamentally changed the landscape of European spice trade. The trade, which had been controlled by Arabs and Italian city-states, was now in Portugal's hands. Dear friends, this discovery was not just about spices. Vasco da Gama's journey to India made Portugal the leader in global trade. This success not only increased Portugal's economic and political power, but also symbolized the beginning of Europe's colonial age. But did these new trade routes truly bring prosperity, or did they carry with them a shadow of destruction? That, my friends, is a question we will explore together in the next story. Ah, my dear friends, let me take you to a time when one of the greatest secrets of the world map was about to be revealed. One of the most significant discoveries in human history was about to unfold, but this discovery was shaped by painful debates and a surprising realization. At the center of this story was one of the most intelligent, courageous, and curious explorers of his time, Amerigo Vespucci. This is the story of the man who realized that the land we now call America was a new world. The late 15th and early 16th centuries were a time of exploration and upheaval. Christopher Columbus had sailed westward, believing he would reach India, but instead he landed on the Caribbean islands. However, the lands Columbus encountered were not a distant part of India as he insisted. No, dear friends, the truth has a way of revealing itself, doesn't it? At this critical point, a merchant and navigator from Florence, Amerigo Vespucci, entered the scene. Vespucci embarked on various expeditions, first for Spain and then for Portugal. His talent was not only as an explorer, but as an observant mind, capable of detailing what he saw and discovered in his writings. In 1499, during his first voyage, he reached the coast of South America and realized that this continent was an immense landmass, far larger than any known territory. Imagine the astonishment he must have felt, dear friends. In his mind echoed a question. If this land was Asia, How could it possibly contradict the information from Columbus's maps? And if it wasn't Asia, then what was this new world? These questions fired up his pen. In 1501, during another voyage for Portugal, he reached the coasts of Brazil, and by then he was certain. These lands were completely different from Asia. There were distinct plants, animals, and human communities. Vespucci described these lands as the New World in his writings. Of course, dear friends, Vespucci's discoveries didn't remain confined to him. In 1503, the letters he wrote caused a great stir in Europe. In these letters, he depicted the lands he had discovered as a new world beyond the ocean. The intellectual circles of Europe were so moved by his writings that cartographers and geographers decided to name this new continent after him. The details and accuracy of Vespucci's writings earned him this honor, and so America was named after Amerigo Vespucci. But, dear friends, this story doesn't end here. Vespucci's discoveries were part of a chain reaction that sparked Europe's age of colonization. But you might be wondering, how did the inclusion of this new world on the maps guide the journeys of other explorers? And how did these maps change our worldview and shift the balance of power? We will explore these questions together in the next chapter. Ah, dear friends, now let me take you on an adventure as boundless as the stars in the sky. For centuries, people had wondered, what does the world look like? Is it a flat, endless plain, or an infinite ocean? Since ancient Greece, some scholars had suggested that the earth was round, but it would take a journey of courage and perseverance to prove this theory for the first time in history. And this unique discovery would begin under the leadership of a Portuguese navigator named Ferdinand Magellan. In September of 1519, with the support of King Charles I of Spain, a fleet of 5 ships set sail from the port of Seville. Their goal was to reach the Spice Islands beyond the Pacific Ocean. But, dear friends, Magellan's dream was not just to reach these islands. No, he intended to sail around the world. Yes, this journey would test one of the greatest scientific theories of the age and leave a lasting mark on human history. The voyage began with difficulties. After leaving the shores of Spain, the fleet battled the wild waves of the Atlantic Ocean. After months of travel, they reached the continent of South America and began searching for a passage at its southern tip. And here, dear friends, the twist of fate unfolded. Magellan and his crew discovered a narrow strait that had never been explored before. Today, this strait is known as the Magellan Strait, and it would carry them from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. But this passage was no easy feat. The waters were perilous, the weather harsh, and the ships had become scattered. Yet, Magellan's determination ensured they overcame these challenges. When they finally reached the Pacific Ocean, the crew was about to face perhaps the greatest trial of their lives. For months, their food supplies had dwindled and fresh water had become scarce. Yes, dear friends, they were surviving on spoiled biscuits and rats. But Magellan, guided by the stars, navigated his ships, and they finally arrived in the Philippines. This journey marked the first time humanity had crossed the Pacific Ocean. Sadly, Magellan did not live to see the completion of his dream. In the Philippines, he was killed in a conflict with a local tribe. Yes, dear friends, Magellan left this world without fully realizing his vision. But the remaining crew took over the leadership and completed the journey. Only one ship, the Victoria, made it back to Spain, carrying its precious cargo from the Spice Islands. And so, in 1522, the the first complete circumnavigation of the Earth was accomplished. This voyage not only proved that the Earth was round, but also demonstrated just how vast the oceans were and how important the trade routes were. However, this immense discovery chain brought along other questions. How would humanity shape this new knowledge and the lands it had reached? The world was no longer just the domain of scholars. It was now the playground of merchants, explorers, and even empires. So, who would this new order enrich, and who would it destroy? The answers to these questions await us in our next story. Friends, now we step into one of the most turbulent periods in world history. On one side, there is the allure of newly discovered lands, and on the other, the encounter with ancient peoples, a time filled with both victory and tragedy. The Spanish conquistadors were the embodiment of Europe's greed and ambition. Dreaming of gold, silver, and land, these men set sail for the New World, bringing not just their weapons, but the seeds of a new order. And this order would bring an end to civilizations that had flourished for millennia. It all began in 1519 when Hernán Cortés set out toward the heart of the mighty Aztec Empire, located in present-day Mexico. Cortés, with a small army and several ships, reached Veracruz and encountered a people who were awaiting the return of the god Quetzalcoatl. The Aztec Emperor Montezuma interpreted these foreigners as a divine sign. However, dear friends, this belief would soon turn into a nightmare. When Cortés reached the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, he was met with a magnificent city, full of canals and temples. This city possessed an order and wealth unmatched by any in Europe. But Cortés's eyes saw only gold. Through diplomacy and intrigue, he took Montezuma hostage. During this time, local tribes, allied with Cortés, began a war that would bring about the end of the Aztecs. In 1521, Tenochtitlan fell, and the Aztec Empire vanished from history. And what of that glorious city? It was lost in the marshes and ruins, replaced by the Spanish capital of Mexico City. Meanwhile, in South America, the fate of the Inca Empire would unfold in a different way. Another conquistador, Francisco Pizarro, set foot in Inca territory at the base of the Andes Mountains. This empire, stretching thousands of kilometers from north to south, was a marvel of intricate roads and magnificent architecture. However, weakened by civil war, the Inca Empire could not resist Pizarro's small but disciplined army. In 1532, Pizarro captured the Inca leader Atahualpa and promised to release him in exchange for a vast ransom of gold. The Inca people emptied their palaces, bringing gold to the Spanish, but sadly, Atahualpa could not be freed. The emperor was left to the cold embrace of the grave, and the Inca Empire teetered on the brink of collapse. But, dear friends, the greed of the conquistadors was not limited to just land. The underground riches of the New World turned into rivers of gold and silver that flowed into Europe's veins. The silver mountain of Potosi in Bolivia yielded so much wealth that the metals extracted from these mines transformed the European economy. Spanish galleons, filled to the brim with valuable metals, returned to Europe, and wealth and grandeur soared in European cities. But, of course, this prosperity came at a heavy cost. The Americas, with their people and cultures, bled. Centuries of exploitation and plundering did not only change one continent, they altered the entire world order. The Spanish made the New World an extension of their empire, while the indigenous peoples were either enslaved or vanished into the dusty pages of history. Yet, this was only the beginning. The riches that the New World offered Europe would awaken the appetites of other empires and inaugurate an entirely new era of colonialism. So, dear friends, in this new age, what did the rising wealth and the crumbling morality and humanity lead to? On what dark trades was Europe's prosperity built? We will search for the answers to these questions in our next story. Ah, Dostler, the great adventure that began with the hazy sails of geographic discoveries was not merely confined to the pursuit of gold, spices, or land. These discoveries changed not only trade routes, but also the fate of souls. With the discovery of the New World, these unknown lands in the eyes of Europe would become the stage not just for wealth, but for a spiritual struggle. For those who believed with all their hearts that Christianity was the one true faith, these continents were both a test and an opportunity. As Spanish and Portuguese ships crossed the waves and reached the shores, it was not only traders and soldiers who disembarked, but missionaries carrying the Bible as well. Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits. Each one of these brave individuals embarked on arduous journeys to spread the Word of God. They worked tirelessly, reaching out to the indigenous peoples from jungles to mountains. For them, these lands were filled with God's lost children who had wandered in the darkness of pagan beliefs. But, dear friends, to the indigenous people, these saviors were often incomprehensible strangers. What often began as an effort born of good intentions quickly turned into coercion. The indigenous people were forced to abandon their ancient beliefs and convert to the true faith. The gods of the Aztecs and the Incas, majestic like the stars in the sky, were declared devils by the Spaniards. All those temples were destroyed, and in their place, cathedrals were built. Pagan rituals were banned, holy books burned, and even their languages silenced. For the indigenous people, this was not just the loss of a religion, it was the destruction of their identity. However, there is another side to this story. Among the missionaries, there were those who genuinely sought to help. Jesuit priests, in particular, tried to empathize with the indigenous peoples. They learned their languages, studied their cultures, and even defended them against the European authorities on occasion. But these efforts were often in vain because the true power lay not with the missionaries, but with the conquistadors who were plundering these lands. The spread of Christianity was not limited to the Americas. Portuguese traders who reached the shores of Asia also began missionary activities in India and Japan. Japan, in particular, became both the greatest success and the most tragic story of these efforts. Tens of thousands of Japanese embraced Christianity. Nagasaki became a stronghold of the faith. However, this new belief quickly faced doubt and oppression. The Japanese government began to view Christian missionaries as a threat, and an era of incredible persecution began. During this time, the European spirit of war in the name of religion, while often adorned with good intentions, also served as a cover. Because missionary work was not just about saving souls, but was also used to culturally and politically control the conquered lands. The conversion of indigenous peoples facilitated their separation from their true selves and made it easier for European powers to keep them under their dominion. But, dear friends, the real question is, did these missionary efforts truly save people, or did they erase thousands of years of cultures and spiritual riches? The religious impacts of the geographic discoveries continue to echo, not only in the past, but even today. So, what other dark periods of history did this spreading movement open the door to? In our next story, we will shed light on these shadowed corners of history together. Ah, my dear friends, the great shifts in history often begin quietly. A breeze blows, the seas swell, a ship sets sail towards the horizon, and nothing is ever the same again. That's exactly what happened with the age of exploration. This grand adventure, which turned the balance of the old world upside down and redrew the map of trade, didn't just change the seas, it changed the very heart of continents. Today, I'll tell you the story of how the rise of the Atlantic Ocean overshadowed the Mediterranean port cities and sparked an economic revolution in Europe. Get ready, because this tale will paint a picture of a world that sparkles with gold and silver, but is also shaped by the dark shadows of poverty and inflation. Once upon a time, the Mediterranean was the beating heart of world trade. Venice, Genoa, Istanbul. These cities were the key points along the wealth routes that carried spices and silks from the east to the west. But with the age of exploration, these old trade routes started to fade. When Vasco da Gama reached India, the spice trade began to shift from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic coast. Lisbon in Portugal, Seville in Spain, and Amsterdam in the Netherlands became bustling ports filled with ships carrying gold and spices from the New World. The old glory of the Mediterranean was starting to vanish in the waves of the Atlantic. Take Lisbon, for example. Once a quiet port town, it became the center of clothes from India, porcelain from China, and gold from Africa. Meanwhile, Seville was overflowing with enormous silver-laden ships from America, and the streets echoed with the hustle and bustle of traders and adventurers. These cities were not only centers of trade, but also of cultural transformation. New wealth brought new ideas. Art, science, and architecture flourished in these cities. But of course, there was a price to pay for this growth. This new trade system didn't just bring wealth, it also sparked a series of changes that shook the European economy to its core. Gold and silver from the New World flooded European markets. At first, it seemed like a blessing for everyone. Merchants were doing more business, kings were building bigger armies, and artists were producing more works. But before long, everyone realized that this abundance also led to rapidly rising prices. In other words, inflation. Historians call this the price revolution. Everyone from the peasants working the fields to the craftsmen in small workshops felt the impact of this economic upheaval. And of course, there was another side to this economic transformation. As new trade centers along the Atlantic coast grew richer, the old Mediterranean port cities began to fall into poverty. Venice's once glorious canals no longer saw as many merchant ships. The connections between east and west were weakening, and the world was reshaping itself around new centers of power. But, my dear friends, here's where we should stop and think. Were the economic effects of the age of exploration truly progress for all of humanity? Or did this transformation plant the seeds of a new system of inequality? Who was this shiny, gold-filled new world a beacon of hope for, and who did it cast into shadow? Let's find the answers to these questions in our next meeting. Together, let's witness how the wealth transported from the colonies across the Atlantic changed Europe's social and cultural structure. What do you think? Did the real story end here, or did it mark the beginning of something new? Ah, my dear friends, history has its strange twists. A journey begins. People discover new lands. But those discoveries don't just draw new continents on maps. They lead to the transformation of lives, cultures, and even the very soil itself. Today, we'll witness one of history's biggest changes, the Columbian Exchange. It was a kind of exchange where not only gold and spices, but life itself, foods, animals, diseases, and ideas traveled across the ocean from one side to the other. The world would never be the same again. If you're ready, let's dive into the story. In 1492, with Columbus's arrival in the New World, this grand exchange began, initiating an unprecedented interaction between two worlds. America generously offered its gifts to Europe. Crops like corn and potatoes radically changed Europe's agriculture and eating habits, especially potatoes, which became a savior in many parts of the continent. Due to their resistance to climate changes and high nutritional value, they became a staple food for starving communities. Imagine the famous potato fields of Ireland were actually a gift from a very distant world. Likewise, corn changed the lives of millions in both Europe and Africa. Many of the flavors on our tables today are a direct result of this exchange.
But my friends, the Columbian exchange wasn't just about foods. Another American product, tobacco, completely changed the lifestyle of Europeans. Back then, tobacco was believed to be good for health. It was seen as a healing herb and quickly spread from palaces to village squares. Who could have known that this smoke would bring both wealth and disease for centuries? You see, the exchange always had both its beautiful and dark sides, intertwined. Of course, this exchange wasn't only from America to Europe. Europe also sent many things to the New World. But not all of these gifts were blessings. Europeans brought animals like horses, cattle, and pigs with them. These animals changed the agricultural and transportation systems of America. Imagine, with the arrival of horses, Native American tribes were able to move and hunt across the plains much more quickly. But unfortunately, alongside these animals, Europeans also brought a deadly gift: diseases. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, carried from Europe, wreaked havoc among the native populations, who had no immunity to such illnesses. Populations dwindled rapidly, and cultures faced the threat of extinction. These diseases made it easier for Europeans to conquer, but for the native peoples of the New World, it was a catastrophe. It's hard to find another such tragedy in human history. But this is where the darkest shadow of the Columbian exchange lies. This great cultural and biological exchange forever changed both worlds. The wealth-bringing potatoes and corn also came with diseases that led to the deaths of millions. So, my friends, who really benefited from this exchange? And who suffered loss? The answers history gives to these questions are still debated. But wait, before we dive deeper into how the world's economic and social structures changed after the Columbian exchange, let me leave you with another question. Did these great changes really strengthen Europe, or did they open the door to brand new conflicts and challenges? We'll search for the answer together in our next meeting. For now, I'll leave you to ponder the echoes of this story. Ah, my dear friends, history is sometimes like a grand theater with changing roles, opening and closing curtains. The great curtain lifted by Columbus's journey not only revealed the discovery of the New World, but also the irreversible shift in world history. Yet this change was no fairy tale. It was filled with tears, blood, greed, and disappointment. Now let me tell you about the political and cultural effects of this revolutionary era. Are you ready? As soon as the Europeans set foot in the New World, they sowed the seeds of conquest and colonization. Spanish conquistadors, by destroying the golden cities of the Aztec and Inca empires, expanded the boundaries of their kingdoms, while the indigenous peoples faced horrific destruction. This wasn't just a battlefield defeat. It was also the destruction of their cultural identity. Temples were set on fire, sacred texts were destroyed, and languages and traditions began to vanish. The voices of these civilizations, whose lands were taken and peoples enslaved, were drowned out by the clamor of the iron armor and weapons brought by the European conquerors. But behind this devastation, a new world order was being shaped for the Europeans. The gold and silver transported from the Americas quickly turned countries like Spain into the world's most powerful empires. However, this abundance carried a curse within it. Europe began to experience a great economic revolution, and the balance of power shifted rapidly. Countries like the Netherlands, England, and France, challenging the Spanish and Portuguese dominance, started establishing colonies. Thus, the first steps of global imperialism were taken. This era wasn't just about expanding borders, but also about the beginning of international competition, trade wars, and colonialism. The cultural effects of the New World were equally profound. The explorers who returned to Europe shared stories of the indigenous peoples' ways of life, which inspired European artists, writers, and thinkers. But this inspiration wasn't always filled with admiration. The view of indigenous peoples as savages led to efforts to transform and civilize them. These efforts turned into cultural imperialism, attempting to erase their beliefs, customs, and even languages through missionary activities and forced conversions. But my dear friends, there's another side to this story that remains behind the scenes. The discovery and colonization of the New World weren't just about conquest. Philosophers and scientists who returned to Europe began to rethink humanity, nature, and the universe, drawing inspiration from this new world. The world was no longer just Europe. This expansion led to both a geographical and intellectual awakening. However, would the shadow of these changes remain on Europe forever? As the balance of power shifted, did this new order bring an uplift for all humanity, or did it signal a collapse? And could the brutal face of colonialism be a harbinger of even greater conflicts to come? In our next meeting, we'll search for the answers to these questions. For now, I leave you to ponder the shadows hidden behind the golden glimmer of the New World. Ah, my dear friends, once again we stand on the threshold of a great era. This time takes us to the end of the Dark Ages and the dawn of a new age. Remember, there was once a time when humanity lived within thick stone walls of feudal castles, trapped between small agricultural villages. Knights and lords ruled with sword and armor, while the people lived bound to the land. Yet geographical discoveries arrived like a storm that would shake this old order to its very core. Yes, this storm would not only reveal new lands, but also tear apart the decayed system of the old world. The economy of the feudal system was largely based on agriculture. Wealth came from the land, and trade was local and limited, but the new sea routes opened by geographical discoveries, along with the wealth brought from distant lands, shook this system to its foundations. Now, there were unimaginable riches, gold, silver, and spices, elsewhere in the world. This new trade sparked a golden age not only for kings and explorers, but also for merchants. Slowly, the land-based feudal economy was replaced by a capitalist system dominated by trade, banking, and capital accumulation. My dear friends, remember, ancient trading cities like Venice and Genoa had ruled the heart of the Mediterranean for centuries. But now, the world map had grown, and ports along the Atlantic coast, Lisbon, Seville, Amsterdam, had become the new centers of trade. Europe was breaking free from its narrow frame and becoming a giant, stretching its arms across the globe. This new order did not only transport wealth, but also ideas and knowledge at an entirely new speed. Discoveries brought not just gold and spices, but also new plants, animals, and information about cultures. Think about it, dear friends. With the invention of the printing press, this flow of knowledge expanded the boundaries not just of explorers, but of scientists, philosophers, and artists. Knowledge once confined to the old world now roamed freely with the maps of new lands and seas. This was one of the greatest movements that laid the foundation for the Renaissance's freedom of thought and the scientific revolution. The scholastic mindset of the Middle Ages was giving way to an inquisitive, research-driven approach in the face of this new information. But my dear friends, every great change comes at a cost. Feudal lords began to lose their power in this new order. As trade and wealth tore down the high walls of old castles, new cities rose with banks, stock exchanges, and marketplaces. People were no longer gaining power through land, but through capital and trade. This not only changed the economy, but also the social structure of society. The closed societies of the Middle Ages were being replaced by a more dynamic structure, full of opportunities. But think, my friends, where would such rapid changes lead humanity? The rise of trade, science, and new ideas. What kind of future would it lead Europe to? Would this new order offer equal opportunities to all, or would it elevate some while pushing others into deep chasms? In our next meeting, we will pursue the answers to these questions. For now, I leave you to reflect on the thin line between the fall of the old world and the rise of the new. Ah, my dear friends, now we are approaching the end of a great journey. Let us reflect one last time on the legacy of the geographical discoveries and this pivotal moment in history. Imagine in those distant times the crossing of seas and oceans, the mapping of unknown lands. This was not just a physical discovery, it was the birth of a new world. Indeed, the deepest impact behind these discoveries was not just geographical, but cultural. People were beginning to learn about each other's worlds like never before. From that old, closed world, we had taken the first steps toward the global society we all now live in. And here, my friends, we must be very careful. The steps taken in this period have become a reality that we live every day. These geographical discoveries didn't just change maps, they laid the foundations for globalization. Thanks to those great sea voyages, not only spices, gold, and fabrics spread across the globe, but also new ideas, new technologies, and new religions. Trade routes no longer connected just a few continents, but spanned oceans, seas, ports, and land passages. Every new trade route laid the foundation for international relations, and every new colonization contributed to the deepening and diversification of the economic system. Today, we live in an environment where we all engage in global commerce, consume common cultural products, and exchange ideas. Each of you likely holds a phone in your hand, perhaps even watching this video, but you must understand that this connection rests on a complex and deep historical legacy, much like those intercontinental journeys of old. The foundations of global trade were laid back then. The networks created by those old merchants, explorers, and travelers have evolved into an economic and cultural network that binds the entire world today. And of course, the world was shaped by this. The modern world today is a system of interdependence, not dominated by one country or one culture, but created by a rich diversity, where something from everywhere contributes to the structure. But my dear friends, this is not enough. Indeed, how did the interactions created by these discoveries continue to transform human relationships, power balances, societies, and cultures across the world? And how did this historical legacy contribute to the globalization of today's digital age? If we bring all these changes together, will the world take an even different path? What awaits us? Prepare yourselves for an in-depth exploration of these questions at our next meeting.